Understood. So I do have the response from Michael Shaw, and the savings are on the margin for companies that are able to take advantage of it. So that large consumers of energy that can make a significant difference in terms of dollars. So the larger you become, the more savings that you see. Is that correct? Correct?
Of course.
Yeah. So what we're left with is, and somebody needs to talk with me a little bit, and then I'll relinquish the microphone. The non-participating customers, these are the smaller customers within the category. Are they at risk for that cost shift? And if so, how much will that be?
Can I just say one thing, Mr. Assemblyman? That is, you know, the PUC over the last number of years, as actually after the Keogh bill, there was no statutory protection for cost shifting in the Keogh measure. This measure actually, as amended, actually statutorily protects any question about cost shifting where the legislature's making its bones on this stuff. And let me tell you, I served twice as chairman of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, the biggest such corporation in the country, 2004 and 2011. And when we surveyed members, the second biggest thing in both instances for those members were cost of energy. Cost of energy. And so if we are faced with these legacy contracts because we decided on renewable portfolio standards when stuff was expensive, it's a lot cheaper now, and what's going to happen is those investor-owned utilities are going to trade out those contracts for new contracts. The argument that was made by Turn with respect to cost savings exists. When you have a facility that's out for 10 years and they can depreciate their assets and now they're going to sell them, their cost of doing business is less. They, in fact, can deliver the services for less because they're not having to pay for all that stuff. They've actually made profits. They've paid down. They've provided for depreciation of assets that might have a longer-term life than what the life of the contract is. So at the end of the day, this is a de minimis increase where there's clearly a customer demand. And the bottom line is, getting to your point about cost shifts, it's a theoretical argument if we're wrong. If there is no demand, if those 685 customers that were in line and others that have talked about it say we don't want it, so fine, there's headroom in the marketplace. Nobody buys it. Nobody's harmed. The only reason why it exists is because there's demand, and what's abundantly clear is that it's very, very, very expensive to leave. And so the bottom line is your cost of energy plus your heavy load that you're having to leave, plus the incidence charges to fix the system, plus your transmission distribution stuff still makes it worthwhile. The bottom line of all of this is we're in a transition. I've talked to the CEOs, top executives of all the companies and spent a lot of time with them and know them pretty well. And we're in transition. The reality is we don't want to hurt them. We don't want to get rid of them. We don't want to have a situation where they go away. Both the utility companies and the workers, as I said, are a huge backbone to this. But we're clearly in a transition, and this is one small step toward a much larger transition with respect to delivery of kind of the new energy world in which we're living in.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add, the PUC, I think, who administers this program and oversees the proceedings where the costs are allocated and then shifted to the right classes, is here.
If you want to ask him,
and you want to ask him, he'll answer your question.
No, thank you.
Okay.
I'll defer to others who may want to ask that. I'm with all due respect to the PUC, I got to find my answers elsewhere.
Right.
Until I have a much higher confident level in what the PUC testifies to. I know, talk about transition. We're in a PUC transition as well. So I appreciate the offer. Number one. Number two, I believe me, I understand the concern of people who have to buy energy in the state of California to have their businesses and their industries operate. You can't be the mayor of Fresno, California for 8 years and not have people come to me and say, we want to expand, but we can't afford the energy price. And that was back in the 1980s and early 2000s. So I'm very sensitive about this. We've had sincere discussions with the senator and sincere discussions with the utilities. And like I said, I started a tweener. I don't know where I'm going to end up when the roll call is taken. But I want to give full opportunity to inform me and other members here of the flux of what is happening. So I'm going to just use my last few moments to ask if the utilities want to do some kind of a response to the question about the cost shift and make your basic case.
Davina Flemings, with PG&E. We strongly believe our folks we don't have exact figures on what that cost shift is, but we do estimate it to be in the tens of millions. And we do, in fact, believe that those costs are spread across not only our non-residential customers, but also our residential customers. That number could fluctuate annually, but there is, in fact, a cost shift. And I just want to make one point.
Have you seen that kind of cost shift under the existing DA usages?
When those customers left, when we lifted the cap back in 2009, yes, there was a cost shift. I don't have those exact figures, but yes, there is a cost shift associated when customers migrate and leave our system and go.
Is that cost shift essentially approved by the PUC at that time? Do you do it independently, or do you have to go to the PUC and ask permission?
There's a formula that they use, and I'm not the technical expert on that, but it's called the power charge indifference assessment, which is used to calculate and attempt to make the utilities whole. So when the customers do leave, we are in fact made whole, but we disagree. We believe that methodology is flawed. So that's our problem there.
Appreciate that. I'm finished with my questions. I appreciate the patience of other members. Who else wish to be recognized? Mr. Hadley? Others wish to be recognized? Any others?
You asked a good enough question.
Not yet? And then
Pressure's
Mr.
on.
Obernolte?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator, thank you very much for bringing this bill forward. I'm on natural resources. I could be sitting across the hall in SB 350. I do believe this is the big hearing today. So I'm happy to be here. I want to support direct access. I believe that it is part of the future of the electricity market. And we have had a political market, as you and I have discussed in the past. We have had a political market driven by a lot that goes on in this building and mandates. And we need to have, at least at the large corporate end of the market, we need to have an opportunity for a real market, not just for the benefit of our corporations and their costs and the jobs that they produce, but that is how we will make the delivery of electricity cheaper grid-wide. I do truly believe that. However, the instantaneous pace at which current direct access capacity is immediately snapped up suggests that there's something funny about how this transition between the grid and direct access, or between the utility and direct access, works. You know, either the methodology is flawed and the cost that is charged users to leave the system is too low, or the methodology is flawed and the costs for users to re-enter the system if they are unsatisfied with their own performance is too low, or unregulated providers of power are doing it so much better than regulated providers that this capacity is snapped up in a second. There are obviously some reputational issues as well, but those reputational issues will be mitigated over time as the grid as a whole becomes higher renewable portfolio standard grid. And the thing we can't forget about this system is that the decisions that people make are decades-long investments. And my personal view is that the cost to re-enter the grid is too low. If you are making an investment that should span decades to be fully returned economically, but you have the right to pay market prices for 6 months and pay regulated prices thereafter if you're wrong, you're being given either a free or a very cheap option to try direct access. That's why I believe direct access is as popular as it is, and why this capacity gets snapped up instantaneously. So my question is whether you would be willing to consider amendments that would either increase the cost of direct access consumers returning to the regulated utilities, or whether you would consider amendments to give the utilities the right to serve these returning customers at a market clearing price rather than a regulated price. That's true for 6 months.
Well, but let me ask you, look, the question is, what's the role of the legislative branch versus the delegated authority to those agencies? AB 32, we've delegated to the Air Resources Board certain authorities. Is it right or not right? We can have an opinion about the Public Utilities Commission. I call them the old Railroad Commission, but they are the entity, and we can deal with that. But they have the absolute authority currently to determine the mix of length of contracts. They can make those determinations. Your analysis on economic terms may or may not be correct. I don't know. I have a number of opinions why it's the case. Certainly it wasn't 100% renewable before, but we have a ton of companies today in the Fortune 500 and a lot of California companies that want to go 100%. This is the most inexpensive way for them to do it. Why should we stand in their way? But if there's a question, so the specific answer to the question is I don't think amendments are necessary because it's already the state of the law. Not only is it for 6 months, so they pay the highest rate they've got to pay. They've got to stay on the contract for 2 years. What we've seen, because after I spoke with you, I went and spoke to the energy service providers, and I asked the question that Assemblymember Patterson asked, how many of these have happened? What's really happened? How many people have come back? No one's coming back because the market works in a lot of ways. We have resource adequacy to make sure there's level of protections. We have the investor-owned utilities, despite what they told you today. I have a letter in the file that said they don't have an objection to the numbers and what happened. We're putting in statute to the extent that there is some question about cost shifting, because this really at the end of the day is about cost shifting because it's too cheap. For the first time in statute, in the amendments accepted already, so I guess the answer to the questions, we already have accepted them. We're putting in that says there can't be such cost driven. There has to be procurement costs that are appropriately reflective. So the bottom line is, if in fact there is a problem, we're making it clear that there can't be a problem in terms of that. I think there's a number of reasons why people want to get off the system. But this notion about long-term versus short-term I just want to share is different, because what the investor-owned utilities, they want a fair level playing field. Well, then good. Let's give the private sector a guarantee not to fail. Let's give them a minimum rate of return so that they're not going to fail, because if they make a mistake in buying electricity, they now go out of business. They go out of business. The investor utilities go out of business because we've granted them a monopoly. So a fair playing field is long-term contracts against a guaranteed rate of return. So I would suggest the bottom line of the point that you raised, and I thought about it a lot since we spoke, and I think we've dealt with it, and I've certainly did the homework with respect to both what the PUC does and with respect to the amendments we've already taken. I think it works. And if it doesn't, guess what? That's what the legislature's about. We'll come back and we'll fix it again. And if there's an aberration, I'm going to be the first guy in line to fix it. Believe me, I'll be around for a while, hopefully.
I would suggest that this is not a market that works in smooth, even flows. The crisis that you lived through when you were in the Assembly was, we can call it a perfect storm from a market and a regulatory standpoint, but what that resulted in billions of dollars borne by the state and by the regulators and the ratepayers. It's our job to think ahead, not deal with it when it happens. And the last comment I would make is that many of the direct access customers have balance sheets similar to or greater than the regulated utilities. And if we are going to give a one-way option on direct access, they should bear the risks. I agree with you 100% that if they make poor business decisions, they should bear the risks. And if they find they're not very good at getting electricity, they should purchase it at the price the market will bear, not for 6 months, but at what the market will bear.
Just a point of clarification. The returning tariff is meant to be punitive. So it's meant to it was designed to make the utility whole. So that was the whole idea. So customers coming back are paying some of the highest rates. That was the whole idea of the temporary bundled service, was that if you come back, you're going to pay the real cost, the short-term real cost of energy, which are the high ones. So you're buying it essentially on a short-term market.
Then I'll make a final point. We'd find out the real cost if they didn't have the right to return, except for on whatever terms the utility or whatever provider wanted to provide them electricity at the time. Yeah. But I yield, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Oberwalter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, so the whole concept of direct access is a very complicated one, and in preparation for this hearing, I had a number of questions and concerns that I'd prepared. And Senator, you addressed every single one of them in your presentation, so it was a little nonplussed. That's never happened to me before. So nicely done. I'll be supporting the bill.
Thank you, sir. Very kindly. I listened very closely to everybody.
Any other members wish to be recognized? Seeing and hearing none. And having limited experience with respect to the gavel, what's
Call
next?
for a motion.
Move the bill.
It's been moved.
We're going to need to explain that.
Yeah, explain the amendments.
We have a motion and a second.
We don't have a motion.
Not yet? All right, I'm going to explain this. Oh, are you in trouble now? First of all, apparently there's no need to accept substitute amendments. Apparently there were some substitute amendments passed out. The author's amendments were due last week. But we will accept a motion that accepts revisions to the language in the analysis, which include the provisions suggested by Mr. Hertzberg, proposed substitute. Be satisfactory with the explanation of that?
And,
Great.
And then read this.
And so, with that, here's the bill, correct?
Well, in addition,
the author has accepted all amendments, except for comment 5 in the analysis that would require inclusion of long-term contracting by direct access providers, and in comment 6 asks to amend to include a provision to preclude the CPUC from adopting an inconsistent decision and a sunset date. Correct?
correct.
Move the bill as stipulated.
Move it with the stipulated amendments in front of us. Is there a second? There is a second. And you get to count.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please call the roll. No, please do not call the roll. Mr. Hernandez has a question, I believe.
I just want to make a comment.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the author. I know that you've been working vigorously with all sides. I appreciate you working closely with the opposition to make it a better bill. Undoubtedly, you've taken amendments to get, I would say, 90% of the way there. And where you didn't make amends or weren't willing to budge is you weren't willing to compromise the ratepayers in terms of impacting them in an adverse way. So I appreciate that. I think this bill has the potential of making the electricity market a better place for all Californians, and I'm happy to support you here in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, very much. Appreciate it.
Anyone else? We have a motion and a second. Closing?
We did not get a close. Would you like to?
Well, I think we pretty much. We pretty much answered all the questions. It was a very robust discussion. I think Assemblyman Oldham answered all his questions, which is pretty good because I know you have a lot of them. But look, the bottom line of this is, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the members. I appreciate the chair for taking the time on this measure. And I know, as I said, it gives a lot of folks pause. We'll watch it over the next couple of years and see how it goes. And this is just one small step among dozens that will need to be taken as we move from these broad principles of this low-carbon economy into how does it actually work. And I'm completely convinced, despite what the eloquent and gracious advocates here today for the investor-owned utilities talk about, as I talk to their management, that this really is part of a larger vision. And what we need to do is to figure out a way that these guys become the pipes and wires companies, deal with revising how the public utility tariff systems work, deal with how the CalISO sells electricity, and really part of a much larger debate. But this was one small step of something that I'm certainly deeply interested in. I've spent the entire time I've been out of government working in this sector all around the planet, thinking about this stuff a lot. And I really appreciate the time and ask for your support of this measure.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Okay, please take the roll.
The motion is to pass as amended to Appropriations Committee. Rendon?
Aye.
Rendon, aye. Patterson?
Aye.
Patterson, aye. Ashadjian? Bonilla?
Aye.
Bonilla, aye. Burke. Daly. Eggman.
Aye.
Eggman, aye. Garcia. Hadley.
Not voting.
Hadley not voting. Hernandez.
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Obernolte.
Aye.
Obernolte, aye. Quirk. Santiago. Ting. Williams.
Okay.
We're going to place that bill on call.
Thank you so much. Thank you, members. Appreciate it much.